All right, I'll get started. You're still expecting, so you can sit there. I think we're expecting 4 more. That's a bit awkward. Oh, he can sit with you. So as I said before, I prepared this document this morning. It's by no means a university, or well, it's probably, that's unfair. I was going to say it's a TAFE quality document, but that's not very nice. It's just designed to give me a pathway to follow when I'm talking about irrigation. We've done these training sessions probably up to 10 times now, and they're always different. So if you've seen one on YouTube before, or if you've been to one before, it should be pretty similar, but obviously having a different audience, I might get different questions, or we might go down a different path. So the intention off the back of this is to do an advanced irrigation training course. We haven't actually held a formal one of them before. It's usually been driven by, say, a business that's got skilled staff that want to do, say, troubleshooting training around decoders or kind of higher level things. So we'll, at the end of this, if you're interested in that, as you'll see at the back, make sure you give us your details and we'll make sure that you get invited. We'll always send the invitations out through the Waterpro, or the Adelaide Trade Community on Facebook, and through our email database. But obviously if you are employed by an employer and they're the employer getting the emails and you're not, and you want to get that, then let us know. I reference a fair bit of, there's a few links in this document. I'll email them to anyone that wants them afterwards, so you don't have to manually type them in, to YouTube videos about doing flow tests and that kind of thing. If you want to find our YouTube channel, if you search that, it'll bring up our Instagram, our Facebook, our YouTube, and everything else. There's a fair bit of information on YouTube, and there's more micro or specific videos around flow and pressure tests, etc., etc., etc. So I'll get into it. So obviously Waterpro is my company. It's started back in 2009 under the name Fluid Designs. We were originally meant to be a water feature construction company, and that didn't work out very well. Never actually finished a water feature. The one we did start fell apart. So when I say we, I had a business partner for about 3 years. Fluid Designs turned into Waterpro in 2010. And then obviously grown to what it is today. We've got another building behind here, which is full of admin and media and design and IT, because we've outgrown this location. And we're currently on the hunt for a northern location to expand, probably not as north as you might like, Mark, but we're looking around Regency Park, Cavan area. We also acquired Railways Landscape Supplies back in 2019, and that's now got a full irrigation shop. Not as much stock as here, and not as many trained staff there, but obviously that's the idea behind having some of the guys here today to, I guess, drag up, that's how I do everything, isn't it? To bring everyone up to the same level, to be able to supply you guys with the information that you need to get your irrigation systems done. So Waterpro is an independently owned store. It's owned by me and me alone. The irrigation market across Australia is kind of made up of 2 large companies, being Reese and Total Eden, and they own about 40 stores each. And then there's a bunch of independents that own 1, 2 or 3 stores that kind of make up the rest. Those independents are part of buying groups, so you might have seen places like Think Water, where are they? Hampstead Gardens, or you've seen maybe Irrigear stores, which kind of keep their own name, but they have part of an Irrigear buying group. We're not part of any of those groups. We kind of stand on our own feet purely because I don't play well with others, probably. Our delivery to market's a lot different to the majority of other irrigation shops. I've got quite a young team. We've got quite a dynamic team. We're a very technology focused business, so you'll see if you go to waterpro.com.au, you'll notice that our online store is probably more diverse than most. We've got more products than most. We've got multiple price levels for trade and retail. You can turn the GST on and off. It'll eventually get to the point where you'll be able to order irrigation and watch it get delivered like you would a pizza or an Uber, and that's in the next years, more than 5 to 10. We have a design and supply business. We do not install, so we do not compete with any of you. A lot of our competitors compete with their clients, which I don't understand. We're here purely to support you and then the retail clients to get the right design, the right advice and the right products. We only stock professional products unless we can't buy a professional product in the chosen area. So I don't know if tap time is a good example. Generally I wouldn't recommend using a mechanical tap timer unless you needed to, but if you chose to do so, you'd try to buy a good one, which we do, which is Gardenia. I think these are still made in Germany. Fact check that later. So yeah, that's probably the Waterpro, where we fit into the market and what we do. So to move into irrigation training, what I've done a little bit different this time, I haven't gone straight into this is how you draw an area and this is how you design it. I really wanted to talk around, as business owners or employees of businesses that are doing irrigation professionally in South Australia, the things that you need to really think about before you start going out and cutting into people's copper lines or installing drip tube off of taps. Because it's probably for the last, well, as long as I've been in the industry, it's never been as strict as it is now. And there was a long time where you could just go take a tap off and put some stuff on, and you can probably still get away with it now and not put dual checks or not put backflow prevention devices in, and the regulatory bodies weren't or aren't staffed enough to come out and monitor the amount of people that aren't doing the right thing. I think that's going to change more and more, especially as the internet becomes used more and more by the regulatory bodies. It's going to be much easier to check person A versus job B versus products purchased from here, and then they'll be able to audit things a lot quicker. So I encourage you, if you are doing certain work, to make sure that you're licensed to do that work. That information's available. I've put a link in here to Office of Consumer and Business Affairs. The irrigation licensing requirements in South Australia has changed a lot, probably in the last 5 years. It's nothing like, I think Victoria is pretty strong with their licensing. South Australia is getting stronger, so just be careful, make sure you know what you're doing. If you are looking for support in licensing, there's a guy I've just become aware of called Trade SA. The guy that owns SA Trade Licensing used to be employed by the Office of Consumer and Business Affairs, helping on the other side. He understands the labyrinth that is licensing for that. So if you need help with your licensing, he has I think it's a fixed price, start to finish, help you with your interviews, preparing your documentation. It doesn't just have to be for irrigation, it could be for paving or irrigation or brick walls or whatever else, retaining walls. So just be across that. One thing that's really important to remember is that backflow prevention is required by law in South Australia to protect the drinking water of the community and of your house. There's 3 levels of backflow, which I think is low, medium and high hazard. So the low hazard is a product like this, which is a dual check. It's just got there's 2 spring-loaded non-return valves in there. Have you guys all seen these? Yep. Cool. So they don't need to be tested. They don't need to be looked at after they've gone in. The next 2 up from that are the double check and then the RPZ. They've got certain regulations around how they get installed. The RPZs need to be installed above ground. I think it's 350 above ground. Mark, you might know that. No. Yeah, so the idea is that if there's enough back pressure on an RPZ, it will blow water out the bottom of the RPZ to stop it damaging or not working. And so they need to be above ground. Obviously, if they were in a valve box doing that, then it's sitting in its own water. So really just to make you aware of backflow. If you're not sure around your backflow requirements for any jobs that you've got coming up and what the differences are between the low, medium and high hazard, talk to the guys at the shop. To give you some idea, the low hazard is pretty much what you guys would be doing, so putting in sprinklers and drip tube. Medium hazard, you might be doing a fertilizer injector system, and high hazard might be putting in a chemical called Treflan, which they use for drip tube to stop roots growing into the drip tube. If that gets back into your drinking water supply, it's a concern for you and SA Water, to the point where if you put a Treflan system in, SA Water want a RPZ on the line and on the meter. So you'd have to put 2 in at that property, which would probably cost you $1,200 or thereabouts just before you get started. So we don't see as much of that anymore now that there's drip tube with copper in it, and the chemicals aren't being used as much. So you've got your license, you've got your tools. I put a list of tools in there. It was just something that I kind of threw together at the start. To do an irrigation installation, you don't really need that many tools. A lot of the work's, well, digging holes, digging trenches, cutting small amounts of pipe. So, to have some multi-grips and some cutters and a shovel or a spade and a drill, and a spanner, you're kind of exhausting the majority of what you need to do. So it's a good industry to get into for a low cost. You know, you don't need to go buy expensive machines, and unless you want to do the digging a lot easier. That reminds me, I might turn my phone down. Yeah, so you've got all your tools, you've got your license, you're all set up. So there's going to be two reasons that you're going to go to someone's house, a property, to do irrigation. That's either going to be to put a new system in or to repair an existing system. If you're going to put a new irrigation system in, you're obviously looking to have some kind of idea of what you're doing, so you need a plan. Now, most professional irrigation shops, and we definitely do this, is offer free irrigation designs for our retail and our trade clients, which takes the guesswork out of what you need to do, but it also enables you to prepare a quote for the client if you're not experienced in that field. So you could say, go measure up the area, come to us, give us the scale diagram with the flow test, and then we're able to prepare you a no obligation quote. So you've got a quote which you can, from your standpoint, you could have a trade and a retail quote, which enables you to go back to your client and say, okay, this is how much it's going to cost. I know where everything's going to go. I know where I have to trench, so you can work out where you're going to trench your trenches and what it's going to cost you. And then it takes away all that guesswork. And I guess beyond that, it removes any actual work as well, because if we're preparing that quote for you, you're out working and making money. So on our website, I'll get that linked up. There's a tab which explains this further on the left-hand side, where you can download a small PDF, and there's a video about how to do a flow versus pressure test. That's linked up in here as well. But the flow versus pressure test is pretty simple. You can either do it using a device. Has anyone got one of these? Yep. These are really handy. You effectively fit that to your water source, wherever it might be. If it's on a commercial site, it might be a water meter in the ground, or if it's a residential site, it might just be putting it on the tap. And then you just get your hoses out to basically get it away from you, so that you're not saturating yourself. This is a digital flow meter, so the water just passes through there and it measures the flow, and then there's a pressure gauge on there as well. You can adjust this ball valve while it's working. Push it the right way. I think I've been set up. And this pressure gauge will move. When we get a pressure versus flow test from a client, we want to get a few points of a reference, so you might test it at 200 and 400 kPa, and then close it off completely and get a static pressure, which is the pressure that's coming into this when there's no flow. Bring those numbers back to us, and then we're able to give you a better quality irrigation design. Generally, residentially, we don't ask for a pressure test because it's not really possible for a client to grab a pressure tester, come here, hire that or borrow that, take it back to their house, perform a pressure versus flow test, come back, give us the information. So an acceptable flow test for residential designs for us is a 10-litre bucket. Turn the tap right on, stick the bucket underneath there, fill the bucket up, tell them how long it takes, come back to us with 10 litres in 20 seconds, 30 seconds, 18 seconds, or whatever it might be. The bucket size doesn't have to be 10 litres, it can be 5 litres or 12 litres or 20 litres or whatever you've got. We just need to know what the numbers are. So you come to us with the litres and the seconds, or the minutes, unfortunately sometimes, and then we can work back from there. So that's your flow requirements. If you are drawing up a scale diagram for us, it's really important that the scale diagram comes scaled. Whatever the scale is you choose, that's fine. 1 to 100 is generally the most common scale. Just thinking. I've got notes there around all the things that are important. So we've got paper that you could take from here and draw a scale diagram. What you're looking to have is the lawn area that you might be looking to water, and you'll have that. Obviously, if that's 5 metres, that's 10 metres. Make this nice and easy. And then you'll mark on the plan where the water source is, and then you might have off the side that's 20 seconds for 10 litres. Sorry if there's people over there that can't see. Then we'll need to know if there's a path here or a driveway, and then you might have the controller back here. So then we need to work out how we're going to get cable back around to the water source if you want to run it automatically. And then you might have that as a garden bed. So that's garden and that's lawn. The more information that you put on that scale diagram, the quicker you're going to get a design back from us, and the better the quality of that design will be. If we have to follow you up and then you have to go back to that site, that can make it hard, or we have to make assumptions and then you're going to get 90% complete design and quote, which obviously makes it hard for you to go to your clients with it. What else is on there? So yeah, what's lawn, what's garden, where you want the controller, and if you want a controller, obviously you can choose to use tap timers instead of controllers. And if there's level changes, that's one that you probably won't find too much residentially, but if that is a lawn and then there's a retaining wall there and that steps down, we need to know that there's different heights, because we can't just squirt a sprinkler straight across the retaining wall because it's going to hit it and obviously not going to work very well. So you bring the plan to us, we make recommendations and do a design. It usually takes about 5 business days. There's been periods this year where it's taken longer and it's been a bit harder. And then we come back to you with an irrigation design and a quote for you to choose or to go see your client. Now we can do this up to a golf course, we're doing 2, 3, 4 golf courses at the moment. We can do subdivisions, we can do ovals, council, new roadworks, all that kind of thing, all the way down to small courtyard homes. This is a service that we offer for free to clients that are buying the irrigation from us. The next step up, when we start looking at ovals and subdivisions and the like, we charge that as a design service, and then it's basically a commercial decision by us whether or not the design gets refunded off the supplier. A lot of the time, something like that, the person paying for the design and the person buying the irrigation are 2 separate people, so they get a design done by us or by an irrigation design firm, and they use that as a, it's a snapshot of exactly how they want the irrigation to look, so that when they're getting 2 or 3 quotes from other people, they're not getting any variations between the quality of the work, the spacing of the sprinklers, the brands that they're using, the cable thickness, all of that can vary. So by getting a professional irrigation design done, it ensures that as the end user, if it's a council or if it's a developer who don't deeply understand irrigation, they've had this design done so that the contractor can't potentially shortcut the quality or the quality of the parts used, or even the size of the pipe or the diameter of the cable that might just pass, but it might be a problem when the development gets expanded. It's probably not something that's going to come across, I don't know what all of you do, but it's probably not going to come across your table too often. So that's that. Once all that's done, we go to the point of application. So there's really only 2 ways that water will be applied to a garden or a lawn, and that's via drips or sprays. So when I say sprays, I'm referring to sprinklers, micro sprays, even shrubblers to a point, which you might be familiar with. The little octa 8, the figure 8, or the 8 squirty, like that's a dripper and a spray. The shrubblers are the same. It doesn't drip unless you turn it right down. So I'll talk about drippers to start with, and if you've got any questions through this whole process, please feel free to ask. I don't want to just talk at you and then have you thinking that there's something that you want to know. As you've probably heard every time someone's talked, if you're thinking it, someone else might be too, so by all means yell out. So for us, we choose to stock professional quality brands, and that's a point of difference between the majority of irrigation stores and hardware stores. The professional brands that we deal with, the Rainbirds, the Toros, the Hunters and the NetFMs of the world won't sell to hardware shops because they want their products represented by trained staff that can assist the clients when they come into the shop to ensure that their products are being designed into systems properly and that they're being then installed properly so that their products are best represented and they're not having any negative brand. So we have majority pressure compensating drippers. When I wrote the document earlier today, Matt reminded me that we do have some non-pressure compensating drippers. So the shrubblers and the spectrums that I talked about before are not pressure compensating, which means that if you adjust one and then you adjust another one, they can affect each other further down the line. A pressure compensating dripper, which this is a pressure compensating shrubler, delivers the exact amount of water that it's meant to deliver no matter where it is on the line, because they can't be adjusted. There's a rubber diaphragm inside the dripper. These are a Rainbird dripper. So these have got the rubber diaphragm in them as well. I'm going to pass that around. I'm assuming everyone's sanitised their hands. So the pressure compensation is very handy especially for vineyard work. So obviously like you guys are obviously out in that vineyard space. Not a lot. Geographically, you're in the vineyard space. A non-pressure compensating dripper could have a variance of 10% of delivery of water from one end of a vine row to the end. Now, when you're growing grapes that are commercially, you know, say if you're growing for Grange, the yield's going to vary from one end of the row to the other if the water delivery is out by that. Generally, residentially, having a 10% variation of flow on your star jasmine or your veggie patch or whatever, you're not even going to know. But the price difference between a pressure compensated product and a non-pressure compensated product is so low that we choose just to stock pressure compensated, and that ensures that we stock the highest gold standard of drippers. Now, that dripper there that I've just passed around is an individual dripper. It's a 4 litre an hour or 1 gallon per hour dripper. They're a they're a US made dripper, that's made by Rainbird. So they're all measured in gallons. So some of the documentation in here is in gallons because it's US. The rough divider is 4:1, so 1 gallon, 4 litres. Now, they do a few different coloured drippers. They do a red one, a blue one, and a black one. They do a 2 litre, a 4 litre, and an 8 litre an hour, which is generally the standard flow for all the competitors as well. So these are made by Philmac. They've got a 2, 4, and 8. Antelco, who are a local manufacturer here that are now in St Agnes, they do a 2, a 4, and an 8, which can give you some flexibility when you're designing an irrigation system for your house, and you know that you've got, say, citrus versus something else, and some need more water than others. You can put the 4 litre an hour dripper there and the 8 litre there, or three twos triangled around a larger tree so that you're getting more delivery. Whereas with drip tube, it's not as easy to do that. You have to put more drip tube out. So the drip tube that we stock, which you can see behind me, everything in this building is pressure compensated, and the drippers are mounted onside the inner wall of the drip tube, either as a boat dripper, which all the smooth stuff which is made by Netafim, that's a boat dripper, and it sits against the inner wall of the drip tube. This is made by Toro here in Beverley, and these are what are they? They're a cylinder, and they look like a snake's eating a rat kind of thing. So they actually push the drip tube around that dripper, and there's a hole on each side of that dripper. They're still pressure compensated, and they still deliver the flow that they're meant to deliver. The Toro is a 2 litre per hour dripper, and the Netafim's a 1.6 litre per hour dripper. Netafim do make other flow rates. I think if you go to Bunnings, you'll see a Holman drip tube, which is made by Netafim for Holman to sell to Bunnings. And if you buy Netafim from one of the large chain irrigation shops in the country, they get theirs made in a 2 litre for a point of difference against the rest of the market, so that you can't compare the two. So it makes it easier for them to sell it for what they want and not have to price against me. So there's advantages and disadvantages of...
Right. Can you run those drippers, those 2, 4, 8 litre drippers off?
Yes. Yep. So that's the great thing about if you were going to, and you might choose to use the 2 litre per hour dripper tube and then add 2 litre per hour drippers, because it's not worth running another line to go under a path to get to an area, and you don't have enough. You don't want to go buy another 50 metre roll of tube, so you just put some 13mm tube and put 4 2 litre drippers there. That's fine. Once it's pressure compensated, and that's fine. You could even run non-pressure compensated drippers over the other side of that path, and it wouldn't be a massive issue. They're just not going to be as consistent. So there's advantages and disadvantages with the two different types of product. If you had like an arid garden with kind of sparse plantings, and you wanted to water infrequently and have direct water to the actual plant, you could use an individual dripper, and it's not going to put water in other areas which might encourage weed growth. Whereas if you've got a really densely planted garden that you want to continue adding to, or that you've got ground covers that you want to just grow everywhere, you're better off looking at drip tube, because you can just put your grid pattern out, and then it doesn't matter where you plant. So I'll just get rid of that. You'll also find if you're going to do a large irrigation system, individual drippers will cost you more. So say for example, it's less than this, but if it's $1 a metre for drip tube on a 200 metre roll, you're getting 3 drippers inside that metre and a metre of polypipe. You then go buy polypipe. You're going to pay, I don't even know, I've been out of the market so long, as in I'm not in the shop anymore. You might pay 60 cents a metre for polypipe, and then you've got to add another 40 cents times 3 for drippers. You've gone past that $1 a metre for drip tube. So it's more consistent, it's cheaper, and it's easier to match precipitation. The downside is if you don't need the water where, what am I looking for? If you don't need the water where you're putting it, then you're wasting water in some cases. So if you have a large area and it's planted everywhere, can everyone see that? You're good. You'll put a header pipe at one end and a catchment pipe at the other end. So that's black polypipe in either 25 or 19 mil. I'd recommend trying to stick to 25 mil if you're using punch adapted fittings. We'll have a play with these after and I'll show you how they work. Is there any pipe? Amelia, was there some 19 mil cut? Oh, it's behind me. Oh. So what you would do is you'd come in, if this was a garden bed and you wanted to irrigate the whole thing, if the soil type was relatively hard, you could use 0.4 spacing drip tube. If it's a sandier soil, you'd go down to 0.3 spacing. So that's the spacings between the drippers on the drip tube. So that's that gap in there would be either 0.4 or 0.3. Then you'd come in half that distance. So we'd come in 200 from there and we'd run pipe from one end to the other, obviously straighter than that. And then you'd just have pipe every 400. So that's drip tube, that's polypipe. This is not to scale. You're getting a dripper every 300 or 400 depending on what your spacing is. And that enables that area to just blanket water. So what will happen under the soil where the dripper is, it'll bulb water like that, a lot better than that. And then you'll just have a blanket of water if you leave it on long enough. You don't have to have those pipes next to each other, so they don't, the pipes should be parallel. The drippers don't need to be perfectly parallel. It's obviously ideal if they are. If you're getting that crazy with it, then that's fine, but you might be spending time concentrating on something that's not completely going to change the irrigation system. Any questions about that? Cool, so that's, yep.
Where's the other dripping go apart?
So with blockages, it's kind of a case of the better the quality of the water in, the less likely you're going to have blockages. Now, you would, if you put a system in like this, all the infrastructure prior to the drip tube is where it matters. So further down, we'll talk about pressure reduction and filtration, and then obviously how that affects this. This will be under mulch in most cases. So once that's all done, all the plants are kind of stuck between it. It's covered with mulch. It's very unlikely you're going to see a block dripper because you won't know until the plants die and you start investigating why. I've sold a lot of drip tube and installed a decent amount, probably not as much as some of you here. I can't remember seeing drip tube blocked from internally. Usually it will be from a root intruding from it externally. If you do have concerns around that, and some people want to be able to see what's going on with their gardens, they do drippers on stakes. So you could have, this is not it, but we've got an Telco product that has a dripper that just drips out the end, and you could just have them at the base of each plant, and then you could visually go see it. So obviously there's clients that have, and not always, but there's in some cases they're older and they're used to having a spray system. And then someone comes in and goes, no, drippers are more efficient. And they're like, I just need to see that the garden's being watered. I can't trust that it's not. And then you might look at this. There are flag systems available for products like this that you can run off of the 19 mil. So when the system's on, the flag pops up. So they can just stand out and go, oh, there's water running through it. But you can't see any of that. So it's really going to, it's like, yeah, the better the water in, the less likely it's going to be to block out. Does that answer your question? It's kind of a bit of a, yep.
Actually, are they easy to clean if they do block?
There's not really any way to clean drip tube. I've heard of people running hydrochloric acid through them to try and clean them. If you had a blockage in a drip tube and you could find it, you'd cut it out. It just wouldn't be worth it and just putting a new one in. Have you had that, Mark? Have you ever had? And like Mark, I don't, without knowing what everyone here does, would have installed more drip tube than a lot of people in the world. So yeah, to not like, if he hasn't had it, and like most of their work's out.
Every job that we do has a filter on it.
Yep. To what level? Just a basic filter after the valve. So I'll talk about filtration now. It's further down the list, but it's important. So in here, I think I wrote something along the lines of, we recommend putting a filter in even if it's mains water, and we definitely recommend putting a filter in if it's not mains water. So mains water is generally going to be clean unless something happens at the road and the water gets dirty. So if you have a breakage and they repair it and some rocks or some dirt get into the line, the chances of it getting into your system are so small it's not funny. But for the 20, I don't even know what a filter costs, $20 or $25 for you can get pressure reducers and filters all in one. Probably haven't got one. It's just going to catch that before it gets into your system. And if you can send the water in clean, it's going to come out clean. If you're sucking out of a river or a dam or even a bore, then you'd have a quite a more substantial filter, and they can go right up to having filters that have pressure sensors in them, and that they know when they're full of dirt, and they'll self-flush while they're operating and then continue on. So we had a job at Malang sucking out of Lake Alexandrina, had a hydrocyclone filter which spins the water around, and obviously the more dirt gets into, the pressure changes. It understands that, opens a solenoid valve on the side of the hydrocyclone and blows all that out, and then it continues on with its day. So it's a good insurance. I mean, it sounds like an upsell because it kind of is, but I would, when you're spending a lot of cases $500, $1,000, $1,200, $1,500 on a residential irrigation system, to stick a couple of filters in is a good insurance policy, especially if you're doing subsurface. Even MP rotators, I mean, we'll talk about sprinklers next, but MP rotators are a pretty sensitive nozzle. You can't flush them, and if you get dirt in them, you're pretty much replacing them. So, did you have anything to add to that, Mark?
No, just yeah, they've got copies.
Yeah, so keep your water clean. The Toro, when there's been times where we've sold more Toro tube than Netafim. I personally think Netafim's a better quality product. The consistency of the rolls, the deliverable, I guess when you deal with a supplier like we do for so long, you kind of start to see what people choose and why. These have got holes on both sides of the dripper. And the argument that Toro used to give us was that if one blocked, the other one would be there as a spare. And so if you're getting, usually it'll come out one hole and gravity will take care of that. So whatever the hole closest to the ground is, it'll drop out. And if that blocked, then it would come out the top. But you're getting pretty, like you're really, I guess, clutching at straws, arguing that as why your drip tube's better than that. So that's drippers and drip tube. I'll probably go quite fast across a lot of this because I want to make sure that you guys are out of here on 4. I'm more than happy to stay back and answer questions if anyone's got any, or obviously we'll have that next level of training where we have an advanced level. This is hopefully good so far, and it's what you're anticipating learning. I don't know what level of irrigation all of you have, so I guess if this feels too basic, let me know, but if you've got questions, let me know as well. So, like I said earlier, drip tube, this is my preferred option. It's faster, it's more consistent, it enables you to deliver matched precipitation water. So further into this, we'll talk about matched precipitation. It just gives you a more consistent watering. There's probably, I don't know, there's a lower likelihood of vandalism on a system like this if it's completely buried under mulch. Whereas if you're using those ones that I talked about before in a commercial area, you know, if you're walking home from a pub and you see something dripping, sticking out of the ground, you might be more likely to rip it out. So, all right, so sprinklers. Sprinklers are probably, I don't know if they're more confusing than drippers for everyone, but there's so many different options when it comes to sprinklers now, and a lot of that technology is quite recent. And it sounds funny to say quite recent because the matched precipitation nozzles are probably 15 or 20 years old now, but nothing much changes in irrigation ever. You know, the fact that we've got Wi-Fi and controllers now is quite exciting, but the technology available versus what's in them is so far from what, like, I don't even think we should have controllers. I think that there should just be a dumb box on a wall and it operates from your phone. But I think the manufacturers are conscious to keep it moving slowly so that they can continue selling their $200 boxes that cost $12 to make in China, so that it's a business. So it's not going to get very good love from them, is it? So the original sprinkler was the impact sprinkler, which is the old, like, banging around sprinkler. And then they've invented a gear drive, and then there's normal van sprays, and now we've got the matched precipitation nozzles, which are the R vans and the MP rotators. I think Toro have a matched precipitation nozzle, and I think K-Rain might as well. We only stock the MP rotator and the R van because of the quality of the product and the support that we get from those manufacturers. We've got relationships with them. I can't talk too much to what the other ones are like because I don't have experience with them. With these, I tried to work out a way to kind of graph this before. With your sprinklers, so when I first started selling irrigation, if someone walked into our shop, they bought either Hunter PGPs or Hunter PSO2 10As, 12As, just to pop up and spray. And they didn't even have, the heads weren't interchangeable. So I don't know if you guys have bought these before, but you're buying a dumb sprinkler with a flushing nozzle on there, and then you're fitting the nozzle to it that you want. Now, back in, like I said, 10 or 15 years ago, the sprinkler came with the head as part of the sprinkler. So if you broke that, you're taking the whole sprinkler out and replacing it. Now you've got the advantage that if you hit the top of this with a lawnmower, which I regularly do, you can just take the head off and you don't have to dig the whole sprinkler up and pull it out. So yeah, I probably should stop doing that. The low precipitation rate and the match precipitation rate and the low flow nozzles, how am I going to do this? It's almost like, so you've got this graph of, I'm making this up as I go, so this might not work. So if that's your precip, yeah, that makes sense. So if you've got high precipitation rate, so 40 mil, sorry, and then you've got time of watering, say that's reversing from, say, 10 minutes, I should go the other way, shouldn't it? So 0 to 60 minutes. So each sprinkler that we supply has different precipitation rates. There's a big document in here about precipitation rates, which is all in the gallons and probably feet. In short, the precipitation rate is the equivalent rainfall that the sprinkler is creating. So if you had 25 mil of rain, you're getting, so it's 1 mil of rain per square metre is a litre per square metre. So we can reverse engineer the amount of water that's coming out of your sprinklers, or you can reverse engineer the water that you've got available and then how many you can run. So when we go into sprinkler design, if this was a lawn, we would get the flow test like we did, and then we'd know how many sprinklers we can put on. But the idea that we're trying to achieve is matched precipitation. So we're trying to make sure that no matter where it is on that lawn, if you were to put a cup out there and catch water, you're going to catch the same amount of water in the corner there as you are in the centre there, with a few variables for wind, etc. So we do a distribution uniformity test. This is kind of going into advanced irrigation on a commercial site. Distribution uniformity is testing a bunch of catch cans. So we'll have catch cans all over the area, not that many, and the sprinklers are kind of throwing over it. And then we go measure how many mil are in each catch can. We put it into an Excel spreadsheet, and we get an algorithm. We have an algorithm that creates a DU, which is the percentage kind of uniformity across there. We had a golf course tell us today that we designed a system that was getting it at 82% DU on a practice fairway, which is quite good. You're not going to get 100%, it just doesn't happen. And there's so many variables with wind and sprinkler angles and pop-up heights and damage, and there's a lot. So we do audits on that for Adelaide City Council. Their DUs on most of their parklands are in the 50s. So the idea is you've got this precipitation that you're trying to achieve, which is 100%. You don't always get there. And then that'll help you decide where you put your sprinklers. Now, in the olden days, that sounds bad. a long time ago. Impact sprinklers, it was a lot harder to get your match precipitation. You had to make sure that you were nozzling down if you had a 90 degree or a 180 degree or a 360 degree to make sure that you weren't delivering too much water to one area, because a 90 degree is going like that. So it's doing 4 times as much in that area as a 360 is with the same nozzle. These new nozzles, so the MP rotators and the R vans, have been designed so that you can put different distanced nozzles in different areas and still get the same match precipitation. Read up a bit about it if you want to know more. I can talk to you in more detail. But what I was trying to show you here is that the original sprinkler design's precipitation rate was around 40 mil an hour. So as a guide, we recommend people put about 25 mil of water on their lawn a week to keep it healthy through temperatures like this, and then obviously increase it and decrease it to cover evaporation for periods when it's hot or when it's not hot at all. So if you do 40 mil an hour with, say, the old school pop-ups, and then you've got the MP rotator sits down here at about 11, and I reckon the R van's at about 16. So you have to run that for longer to get the same amount of water. Whereas with the normal pop-up, the old school pop-up, you'd only really want to run it for, what are you getting, 10 mil of rain in 15 minutes, or 10 mil of equivalent rainfall in 15 minutes. So the idea is that you can use this data to work out how often you should be watering depending on the sprinkler. I'm jumping around heaps and I'm really sorry. I'll do some basic designs on here just to give you an idea of where I'm going with that. Does anyone have any questions about the precip side of things yet? No. So depending on the soil, they can't always handle the amount of water that it's getting put out. So if your soil's hydrophobic, for you to put out 40 mil precip rates, it's just too much for it to handle. So that's one of the great things about having a product like the Hunter MP rotator, is that it's only putting out 11 mil of equivalent rainfall over a whole hour, which gives your soil time to take that water. If you're looking to try and get a deep root watering system with your lawn, the idea is to get the water to go deep irregularly rather than watering daily. So you might choose to water with an MP rotator twice a week for an hour at a time. You're getting that 22 mil of water, but it's going really deep into the soil because it's happening in one cycle, in one event. The other thing that it's good to know is when you've got a sprinkler that's delivering 11 mil an hour and you want to deliver 25 mil a week, if you know that your house has had 8 mil of rainfall in the last 7 days, that's already been covered by Mother Nature. You only have to cover the other 20, what is that, 18? Jeez, 17 litres mil an hour. So, where is it? Basic irrigation design. So, with sprinklers, it doesn't matter what sprinkler you've chosen to use, whether or not it's an R van or an MP rotator or a gear drive. The principle of design stays the same. So the idea with irrigation design is that you're hitting your sprinklers head to head. So if you've got a square that's an equal square, all squares are equal, each sprinkler is exactly the same. So if that's a 4 metre sprinkler, a 4 metre square, you've got a sprinkler that throws 4 metres that way, 4 metres that way, that one throws 4 metres that way and 4 metres that way, and so on. That'll ensure that you're getting head-to-head coverage, which is really important, and you're going to have a match precipitation design. Now, that would work for Hunter, the normal old school sprays, because they're all the same sprinkler. The problem that you'd have is if you started trying to put a 10A and a 12A and a 15A all on the same run, they're delivering different amount of water and you're not going to get that match precipitation. So when we start to move into something like this won't matter either, but, well, it will actually. No, it won't. Sorry. If that's 4 metres and that's 8 metres, you're doing the same thing. So that one's hitting that one, that one's hitting that one, that one's hitting that one. So they're doing that. So a double squared rectangle is just as easy for us to design as a square because it's really simple. The problem we have is when someone comes in with a 4 metre by 6 metre rectangle, because you can't stick a sprinkler there that throws 4 metres because it's going to overthrow. So you need to stick a sprinkler in there that throws 3 metres, then it's not going to quite hit that one. So you're not getting head-to-head in all areas, and that's where products like the MP rotator come into play, because you can short throw them a little bit and you'll still get your match precipitation, whereas if you try to do that with the Hunter sprayers, you won't. Then if you start looking at something like this, and that's 2 meters, what's that, 8, 10, 12. If you water an area like that with an R-van or an MP rotator, the little sprinklers here and the big sprinklers there can all work together. 10's probably pushing it a bit because there's no MP rotator that'll throw 10, but say that's 9.5. Oh, they don't work either, do they? Yeah, so we'll use R-vans for this purpose. Actually, no, we'll change the dimensions. Say they're 4 meters. And that's 6, and that's 8. And this is another, I guess, a really good example of using a shop like ours to do your irrigation designs. You'll learn this over time, and eventually you won't need us, because it'll become too commercially unviable for you to come all the way here, give us a plan, wait for it, when you can just look at it and go, yep, sprinkler, 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 sprinkler. You've worked out how that works for you, $15 a corner, yep, sweet, that's the sprinkler and the fitting, and then we've got, $2 a metre for that, and then $15 a metre for trenching or whatever, and you can quickly spit out a quote. Until that point, you bring it here, we refer to the data that the manufacturers have given us, so everything we sell has data behind it. It's not just a slit in the mouth of a sprinkler that just throws water for no reason. The MP rotators, if you've seen the charts, can you get me some charts? They do these tests with these sprinklers to work out what the precipitation rate is in wind tunnels, and then put it into a spreadsheet, so that then we can use that spreadsheet to then design these irrigation systems. It's really quite simple, and I know it sounds complicated, but once you understand all those little basic steps, it's really easy. So we can go, all right, so they're 4x4. These sprinklers, if it's an MP 1000, are using 1.5 litres per minute each. At 90 degrees, I reckon that would be high. Do you remember? No. So it's either 0.8 or 1.5, I reckon. So, so that we know if they're all 1.5, that's a 6 litre per hour, 6 litres per minute? Yeah, that's a 6 litres per minute system. And we know that the tap's delivering 15. We can run that on one line. But then down here, that's going to be, say, 1.5, so that's 6. And they'll be 3, so that's 12. 12's starting to get dangerously close to 15, especially if we're running it through something like this. We had an incident recently, that sounds a bit worse than it is. We had a situation recently where the client was running their sprinkler system through a tap timer like this, and these just absolutely strip any flow or pressure that you've got because the internals of them are so small, and it doesn't matter which one you use. I think that's the best. That's got the highest flow, but if you have 30 litres a minute going into this, you'll have 20 litres a minute coming out of it. So we didn't have to. We chose to give the client another controller and help him split the system because it was something that we hadn't taken into account. So where are those? Yeah, so if you have a look at those charts, there's a little triangle and a little square on the top of the spreadsheet. That's for triangulated design and squared design. So if you have an oval irrigation system, you can design your sprinklers like triangles, or you can design them, as I've done over here, as squares. That'll tell you the precipitation rate for those designs, and it's pretty consistently 11 or 10, I think, until you get to the 800 SRs on the back. Maybe are they higher? Do you know? Yep. So all that data enables us to choose the right sprinkler for the job. Now, one way of making this work well when you start going into those really long distances, Rainbird's R-van and their 5000 can work together if you put a match precipitation nozzle in their 5000. So the Rainbird 5000 is a gear drive. Sorry, Amelia, can you grab me a 5000? So the original sprinkler, that's just the top of it just goes back and forth. They've invented a nozzle that you can stick in those big sprinklers that are throwing back and forth. So those ones there, that will deliver the same amount of water as an R-van out here. So you could put your 2 little R-vans or whatever you choose out there and those gear drives all on the same line. I don't know that anyone else has done that. I'm not sure that Hunter have got a match precipitation nozzle for their gear drives that matches their MP rotators. But yeah. So precipitation. So match precipitation is something that's really important for you to focus on, especially because the technology is there now to do it easily. If you're looking to get consistently watered areas, so if you're trying to grow fine turf so that you can stripe it up and have it look the same, it needs to have the same amount of water in all areas. Yep. So that's a gear drive for anyone that wasn't kind of knowing where I was going with that. So that just turns and just goes back and forth. They're the sprinklers that you'd see in every parkland across the country. You can nozzle them down to work with an R van. No worries. Right. Any questions about sprinklers? No? I jumped around a bit there. I'm very sorry. That is my personality. My brain's working at different speeds than my mouth a lot of the times. Probably one thing I didn't cover is you can get different height sprinklers. So if you're putting in MP rotators or Rainbird R vans, they'll fit to any one of these bodies. So that's a 6-inch body, which you might not have seen before. And then that's a 4-inch body, that's a 2-inch body, that's a Hunter, that's a Rainbird. The 4 inches that I talk about refers to the pop-up height of the sprinkler, not the actual body. So that's 100 mil from there to there, not 100 mil from there to there. So a lot of people will come in here thinking that this is a 6-inch because that's actually 6 inches. When it's a flushing nozzle that comes off really easily. So yeah, the nozzles that are on top of these are flushing nozzles. The idea is that you'd install the bodies all around the system, backfill the soil around it. This will probably help with drip tube as well. You flush your system before you finish it off. You let all the water blow out of these nozzles. They work at a certain flow. I'm not sure what it is, but they're actually, the idea behind these nozzles is that they don't throw so much water out that they don't pop up. They'll still pop up. And then you can go around and grab the throat of that while it's up, take the flushing nozzle on there and fit your nozzles, and you've got clean water coming out. While you're installing these systems, you probably, if you really want to get quite, surgical about it, you can put duct tape over every piece of pipe as you're working before you put a fitting in it, and then cover that so that you're not getting any dirt into these pipes. That's best practice. Any dirt that gets in there is going to blow out somewhere when it turns on, and if that happens to be an R van, well, that's not so bad, but if it's an MP rotator nozzle and any dirt gets in there, you're going to have some problems. The reason I paused on the R van, you can actually lift the R van nozzles gently while they're operating and they'll flush themselves, so less likely to get blocked than the MP rotators. So they're the different height sprinklers. I would encourage you to try to do at least 3-inch when you're installing in turf, because the 2-inch pop-up's not that high, and the majority of the time, if you're doing work for clients, they won't mow their lawns regularly enough for these sprinklers to clear the lawn, and then you'll get a phone call saying your sprinklers aren't working, or there'll be a massive green area directly in front of this sprinkler, and the rest of the lawn will be dead because the lawn's just catching all the water, and that'll be your fault because you didn't put the irrigation system in properly. You did, they just don't mow their lawn enough. So try to go to 3. If you can get 4s, that's great, but it's easy for me to say I'm not the one digging the trenches. You start digging trenches with a 4-inch and a fitting, you're kind of getting into that 200 to 250 mil of nice trenches. So you want the sprinkler to be installed just below the surface of the finished lawn. They're a pop-up sprinkler for a reason. The idea is that they'll pop up and clear the lawn to water, and then when you're mowing lawnmower over the top of that sprinkler, it's not hitting it. I'm very aware of this because I keep running over my sprinklers at the moment, to the point where most of mine have snapped off the fittings, so I have to dig them up and reinstall them because my lawn wasn't high enough. My sprinklers sit about that much higher than my lawn, so.
Sometimes they don't come down.
Yeah, if they're not coming down, then there's something wrong with the seal. So if they've got dirt in them, that can make that a problem. It depends on the like. Are you talking like Hunter and Rainbird, or are you talking hardware shop stuff? Because yeah,
the MP's running basically.
Okay. So the MP rotator on a Hunter body,
No.
on a Rainbird body. Yeah, okay. So that's because that's what I was curious. The Hunter MP rotator has no bearing on the sprinkler going down. It's like that's got to do with the friction around that shaft. These have a tapered shaft, so the idea is that they'll have some flushing occur when you turn them on. I think these do. I know the gear drives do. So the idea is that the top of that shaft is slightly skinnier than the bottom, so that as it's coming into that seal, there's areas around the side that water can flush out. And when it gets to the top, it's wide enough that it seals over. The seals that Rainbird use are really high quality. I'm surprised that they're getting stuck up. I'd be interested to see. Yeah.
As if dirt or something is stuck.
Because they should flush. I want to find out if they do. It looks like it. Like that's bigger there than it is there. Yeah, I'd be keen to see that. If it's happening, it depends if it's a batch problem or, like, obviously if it's a site problem and it's like a sandy area, or they've just top dressed the lawn and all the sand's got into the side of the sprinklers, that's a problem. If it's a batch, if there's a genuine issue with the seal, then that could be a thing as well. It sucks, and this is probably a good opportunity to talk about warranty. It sucks when stuff like that happens because it costs landscapers and tradespeople time, but the manufacturers will always warrant their products if there's a genuine warranty issue, but they'll never warrant any time or damage to your sites. And that's just how it is. And you can sue them, you can threaten them, and that's it. Like, there's been one occasion when I've managed to squeeze a warranty. It wasn't even a warranty. We had a manufacturer make drip tube and they didn't drill any holes in the tube. So it was just a big brown roll of poly pipe that with drippers living inside, but no holes for the water to come out. And a client, it was for subsurface, and they'd installed this whole subsurface system, and they came to the party and gave them enough. What did they give them? I think they gave them the stock to do the job twice to compensate for their time and to do it. But it's very, very rare that you'll get someone like, you know, so it's a good argument for choosing the best quality brands that you can, but I'm also saying it to try and highlight that if there's a genuine issue with their seal and it's not going down, we need to know about it so that we can go back to them. We sell a lot of irrigation, more than most independents, and every time we go back to a manufacturer with a problem, we're the only ones that have the problem. But they'll still deal with it. Like, it blows me away. Oh, no one else has had a problem with it. I bet they have. So, but the manufacturers we deal with are pretty good. I don't work behind the counter anymore, so I don't see as much of what's coming in, but we can warrant things without permission. So I don't know what, like, say, this would probably be something that we couldn't. So the Orbit slide control is a pretty old controller. I think they still want them back if there's a problem, and they'll repair them. But things like beehives and these, if it comes back, our guys have the authority to look at it and replace it straight away. But we need to know if that's happening so that we can go back to the manufacturer and say, look, there seems to be this consistent issue. Be interesting to know if it is, like I say, it's not the MP rotator, and I can't think of any reason why it could be, but it'd be interesting if it is.
Well, it could be just because everything, once you do it, I mean, not that much time to go back.
He's going to pop it.
Yeah, just
Yep.
pop it down. But when the lawnmower's there, you haven't got time.
Oh, because you're on so you're mowing there? Okay. Yeah. My issue with my mower is I mowed over the whole sprinkler and smashed the fitting with a 150 kilo mower. So, but my lawn's not high enough. Anyway, that's my problem. All right, so it's 3 o'clock. Does anyone need to stop and go to the toilet, get some water? 10 push-ups, nothing? Everyone's cool? Energized? Yep, wicked. I'm not getting a lot back. So, once you've got your drippers or your drip tube or your sprinklers decided by us or by you, they're in the ground, you need to somehow turn them on, turn them off. You can either go with a manual system or an automatic system, and if you go with an automatic system, this probably isn't fair to actual automatic systems, but you can go with these automatic systems, or you can go with a proper wall-mounted mains power controller that then runs cable out to the solenoid valves, which are varied in brand, etc. Now, in that booklet that I've prepared, you've got a bit of a thing, kind of the pros and cons of manual versus automatic somewhere. Yeah, so a manual system is as simple as you putting a nut and tail on a tap. A nut and tail is a thread with a barb, so you just screw it onto the tap or onto the bottom. Well, that's not manual, is it? Just taking the poly pipe straight to the tap, turn the tap on, turn the tap off. That's the most primitive manual system you can go to, and then you can kind of move out from there. So you might still want to manifold a manual system, which would be putting a bank of ball valves underground coming off of a manifold, which is either made from manifold fittings or from PVC, or you could make it out of copper if you're a plumber, whatever works. And then you just manually go turn those valves on and off when you want to water. The problem with that is you have to physically be there to turn them on and off. The advantage with that is they will never, ever, ever break. Like, nothing goes wrong with a ball valve except the handle rusting, which you still use it. An automatic system, you don't have to be there. You can use Wi-Fi controllers now. You can like cycle and soak. There's so much variation around how the automatic valves work. There's just more that can go wrong with them. Now, the majority of the valves that we sell have a 5-year warranty. Some have 2. The Rainbird has a 5. Toro, or the Rickdell valve, which is the grey valve with the red cables, has a 5-year warranty. It's a 30 or 40-year-old design. Nothing goes wrong with them. Like, they just keep working. So usually if there's a problem with an automatic valve, it's because it's been installed incorrectly, or there's a rock in the valve, or someone's snapped the coil off. It's very rare for it just to stop working. So we obviously would encourage people to use an automatic system if you've gone to the trouble of putting in all this other stuff. If you don't turn it on, it doesn't do anything. So having that automation there ensures that if you go on holidays, which obviously no one's doing at the moment, but if you can, it can turn on and off. It also means that you can have your sprinklers turning on early in the morning when you might want to be watering while you might still be asleep before the morning showers occur and everything else that has to happen before you go to work. It gives you that flexibility. The step up from doing a manifolded ball valve system in ground with these to buying actual solenoid valves financially is not that much. You know, a ball valve, I don't even know what these cost now, 12 or 15. I don't know. But a solenoid valve is going to be in that kind of $19 to $24 trade bracket, whereas a ball valve might be 12 to 15. You can still use these manually. Does everyone know that? You can turn that coil quarter turn and it will simulate the valve turning on electronically, and then you just go turn it back off, or you can do it via the bleed screw. So you could put a automatic solenoid valve system in the ground before you can afford to or get to putting in an automatic controller, and you can use it manually. I did it at my house because we hadn't finished the backyard, but I wanted to water, so I was just turning them on and off. I ended up actually taking the coils off and putting battery operated coils on and running a battery valve until the controller went in. I'll talk about that in a sec. So I don't think it's going to be a regular occurrence that you're going to be putting in manual irrigation systems. I wouldn't think. If you do and you use those 4 outlet off the tap things, just be conscious of the flow restriction that you'll get through them. If you move to automatic and you choose to use well, when I say automatic, a tap timer, if you're going to go to the absolute most basic dial tap timer that doesn't have any batteries or anything in there, it's just a cogs turning inside a thing, try to buy a brand that's a good brand. So obviously there's Popes and Holmans and everything else that you might find at a hardware shop. We choose to stock Gardenia. They are made in Germany. There you go, fact checked right at the top there. These, I don't know, they might be $30, they might be $26, but compared to buying one for $15.95 and then forgetting to turn it off one night and having it not stop, it's kind of a no-brainer. The step up from that is to look at these battery operated ones that will turn on and off. The majority of them are a ball that turns, so it's quite small, and it's a gearing system that the batteries turn the ball around and then turn the ball back around. I think the Hunter is a diaphragm. Do you know? I'm pretty sure the Hunter tap timer operates like a solenoid valve, so it's a diaphragm in there rather than a ball that turns. Whichever one of these you use, including this, just remember that the internal path for the water is much different to what it would be going through a valve like this, and that you will have flow loss. So when you go do your flow test and you're like, oh cool, we've got 30 litres a minute, we'll push it out to, you know, say that's 18. We haven't gone, too close to that 30. We're, 60, 70%. When the system turns on, 30 litres becomes 20 litres through one of these, and then sprinklers have a thing called flow by. So when they're popping up, that water that we were talking about before, flushing past that shaft that's cleaning it out, increases the amount of water that's actually being used. All of a sudden, for that first period, you've got 20 litres and you've only got 20 litres, and you find these things going, and then you like kind of hold one up and then you grab another one and then they start to work. That's because of that, or that you haven't split them on enough valves. So that, just remember that when you're doing your designs, or if we're doing your designs, or if you're doing the designs. The next step up from all of that is to move to a fully automated system, which would obviously, I guess from a commercial standpoint, be my choice because I make more money and you do too as contractors, because you can obviously make margin on all that stuff. It enables you to have Wi-Fi connectivity to your controller, so that if you're at Greenock and you've done a job at Manapara and the client's rang you and gone, the controller's not working, I went out there and touched it and now it's not working, you can remotely log in from a Wi-Fi point on your phone. So you might have the parental access on their controller and give them child access to the controller so that you can reprogram what they've made a mistake with. There's a lot, there's weather data that kind of plugs back into this so that you can tell your controller to reprogram how much it's operating from, or 4 or 2, depending on the amount of rainfall that we've had or depending on the amount of sun that we're getting, or the all those weather events. Now there's a lot to that, I'll explain that in a sec. So I'd encourage you to try to go down the automatic solenoid valve path if you can. Sometimes the client can't afford it, that's cool. I guess it's probably important, this isn't really irrigation advice but business advice if you want to hear it, to make sure that the client understands that sprinklers don't turn themselves on and off if there's a manual system, and that it's going to fall back on them to turn it on and off. So I talked briefly about the manifolds. If you're manifolding, actually, is that enough solenoid valves? Yeah, I think I covered everything on valves. So, one other thing with solenoid valves. So everything that I'm talking to you guys about is quite residential, and that's because I'm assuming that none of you are installing commercial irrigation systems. These solenoid valves that I'm holding here are mains pressure rated, so they're rated to 1034 kPa, or what's that, PSI? 1034 kPa. So they can hold mains pressure. You're never going to have a problem with them blowing. Commercially, Hunter make an ICV and Rainbird make a PESB or a PES. They're like 1600 kPa, so they can handle higher pressures. It's important to remember that a lot of these don't handle the pressure that most houses in Adelaide have, especially the older houses that haven't had the pressure reducer fitted to the building. So new houses now, they get that pressure reducer fit at the front of the house. It's 500 kPa or thereabouts. That's designed to protect all of the infrastructure inside the house. So washing machines and the like now don't have the strength to handle the pressure. If you have a look at the device, it will say on it somewhere what it can handle. Not that one. Come on, guys. This one's rated to 689 kPa. So it's not uncommon for a house to have 800 kPa. You'll also get spikes of pressure when things turn on and off. So when we're doing this pressure test that I talked about before, if you've got that on your tap and you slam that valve closed, that pressure gauge will like dial right up. I can't explain the physics behind why, but you will have pressure spikes when you turn things off. If you need to put a pressure reducer on a product like this to protect that the pressure reducer goes above it, so that's protecting the product, whereas generally we're using pressure reducers below or after solenoid valves to protect the drip tube from blowing or to make sure the drip is operating correctly. There's two types of pressure reducers, some that are capable of handling static pressure and some that are capable of only handling dynamic pressure. The dynamic pressure is when water's flowing through it, so these ones here, these aren't designed to hold pressure all the time. So you would put them after that to get your pressure down for drip tube. I need to talk to you about pressure and drip tube later. These solenoid valves are very rarely going to need a pressure reducer in front of them because most houses don't have enough pressure for that to be a problem. You'd only be putting a pressure reducer after it. I don't have any static pressure reducers here. They look slightly different, they're a bit more expensive, but they can sit under mains pressure constantly and they won't have a problem. While we're talking about mains pressure, I just want to remind you guys that normal 19mm poly pipe is not mains pressure rated, and you can't use this to run from a water meter to a solenoid valve. So when you're installing these products, you've got to remember that. Need more space. I saw a video recently on YouTube by a lawn person that was doing a home irrigation system, And they had their solenoid valves in the ground, and they had a garden tap here, and that was a manifolded, so like I've shown you before. Now, they needed to get water from their tap to their solenoid valve so that they could go out and water their water their lawns and their garden. They put a nut and tail here, which is what I talked about before, and ran 25mm poly pipe straight into that manifold and put Cobra clamps on there. Now, that pipe's only rated to 350 kilopascals. As I've just said to you, you will get 800 to 1000 kPa coming through these pipes. These pipes struggle with 350 at the best of times. The speed at which the manufacturers are pumping this out, then it's not, I mean, you'll see inconsistencies with pipe. I don't know if you guys have had any trouble with pipe, but you can't trust that with your mains pressure. So when you're coming from something like a garden tap or a ball valve that a plumber might have put on a water meter for you, so you might have your water meter and they've teed off there and put a ball valve there for you. You obviously need to put your backflow prevention device there, and then you head out. All that pipe, all the way out to your, whenever you get to your solenoid valves, must be mains pressure pipe. The last thing before your irrigation system has to be mains pressure, so the on and off has to be mains pressure rated. Everything before it has, and I know I'm harping on about this, but it's really important because I see it even with people that have been doing it for a long time using this for mains pressure, and it's not mains pressure rated. Things that are mains pressure rated are copper, Rehow, Hepworth, class 12 PVC, not class 9 PVC, so it has to have PN12 written on the side of it. Blue line. Have I missed anything? That's most of it. Yeah, so you can't use polypipe for that. I've seen it happen with homes where a builder has built a home and they've ran a 19mm poly underneath the pavers out to the backyard. The paving's been done, homeowner's taken their house, got someone in to do it. They put a solenoid valves in, there's no other pipe. They're like, oh, just stick the 19mm, it should be all right. And then that whole pipe's under pressure all the time. You can't do that. So, pressure reduction after a solenoid valve. Well, we've talked about that 500 kPa or 800 kPa. Sprinklers and drip tubes have different pressures that they like to operate at or that they perform well at. So, say drip tube at the dripper, anything around that kind of 130 to 180 kPa, the dripper's going to be happy. And I think sprinklers, if you look at your MP rotator cards that you've got there, it actually says on the side, the kPa down the side there, so 200, 280, 350, that's the pressure that's at the sprinkler head. Just spitting on things. That's the pressure at the sprinkler head for that data. So if you're putting 500 or 600 kPa through one of these and it's heading out to that sprinkler head, you're not going to get the data that you're expecting to get because there's too much pressure, and that's when you'll find that you get misting. And you'll get inconsistencies. Pressure compensating drip tube won't drip at the rate that it's been designed for if the pressure that's going into it's too high. So that 2 litre an hour and 1.6 litre an hour I talked about before only works if the right pressure is going into it. If you're running sprinklers and drippers from the same bank of solenoid valves, you can't necessarily just put a master pressure reducer at the start for all the valves. It's quite specific. So we've got, what are these? 25 PSI pressure reducers here, which I think is 169 or something kPa. That's a great pressure reducer for a drip tube system. But then if you're trying to run RVANs or MP rotators, you might need a 40 PSI pressure reducer to get it down to where it needs to go. Now, you can get that in a sprinkler, so I don't know if you've ever seen that. This is probably one of the newer technologies. They make a sprinkler, a 4-inch body with a pressure regulating stem in the shaft of the sprinkler. So you don't need to put the pressure reducer on the valve, it's in the sprinkler so that you can then set, so we've got 30s and 40s. So I think the 30s are for MPs and the 40s are for RVANs or vice versa. Amelia and Dustin have just started here. Well, Amelia's been here a bit longer than Dustin, so she should know the answer to that. But yeah, this is as much for them as it is for you guys, but I was just hoping that they knew the answer. That's really disappointing. But yeah, you can get pressure regulating shafts in your sprinklers, which will do that for you. There is, can you get me an AccuSync, please? So, just cause as much of a scene as you can. So these pressure reducers are quite a traditional pressure reducer. There's a spring in there that restricts the water, I think. Maybe it's not a spring, yeah. A spring in there that restricts the water. There's a product called an AccuSync and Hunter, that's a Hunter product, and then Rainbow do a, come on, OmniReg? No, that's Toro. Oh man, I've been out of the game too long. Anyway, it goes on the solenoid valve. So what will happen is you might go to a site where you've got things blowing apart and you need to put a pressure reducer in, but this is already in a solenoid valve, and there's poly coming here, and there's a manifold here, and there's a valve box on top of it, and you just can't physically get to that valve to take it out. You take the coil off the valve, which is this, and then you put the AccuSync in here. I'll show you what that looks like, and you screw that back on top. That AccuSync will pressure reduce this valve from the top of that thread, which I still don't understand how it works, but I don't know if the water goes through it and there's a spring in there. I'm sure there's a video on YouTube for it. Lisa will find it and send it to you. Won't you, Lisa? But yeah, that's one way of getting pressure reduction at a valve without actually having to physically put it in front of the valve if you don't have access. Valve boxes is something that's on there that I haven't really talked about too much. Your valve boxes are never big enough to get everything in that you need, and they're always too big for the client. So to try and get the least amount of products in that valve box is ideal. So putting an AccuSync on top of a solenoid valve instead of putting one of these after a solenoid valve is one less thing that's in the box. Most people I see, the box sits on top of that, and you're never ever going to get to that again because the box is there. So these are some of the larger valve boxes that we stock. There's bigger ones than that. I don't know where they are. And then right down to really small boxes that you'll use for air release valves and flushing valves. I'll talk about them quickly while we're there. You talked about drip tube blocking up and being a problem before, and I said about infrastructure. Infrastructure for drip tube, that's something that's important. That's an AccuSync, so that screws on top of the valve for the pressure reduction. One of the ways that drip tube will block up is when it's being turned on and off, if some water gets drawn into the hole when it turns off. Now, Netafem's product, which is this here, is an anti-siphon product, so it requires a certain amount of pressure to open and close. So I think it needs 100 kPa to open. When the system turns off, the pipe stays fully charged with water so that there's no chance of anything sucking into it. This product doesn't have that. So when you turn Toro drip tube off, it will completely dump everything out of the pipe and it will become a air-filled tube. Unless you put an air release valve on it, there's a good chance that when the water's dripping out, there's air trying to get in and the air sucks dirt into the dripper. So we put air release valves on those systems to help let air in. I don't have an air release valve either. And a flushing valve, just a VQA. The idea is that the air release valve, the air gets in there rather than sucking through the drip tube, and then it stops that blockage. I don't sell air release valves in my systems anymore because the drip tube, once it's full of water, no air's in there. The idea is that you just have to make sure that your flushing valve's open when you commission the system so that you blow everything out of it and the tube fills up with water only and all the dirt blows out the end. So we'd usually put a flushing valve at the end or the lowest point, and then we'd put an air release valve at the highest point so that the air's coming in while the water's going out. Does that make sense? Yep, cool. All right, there's an air release valve on its way. So, did I knock that over? There we go. I have to give that away now. It's got a wet box. So these are, thank you. So that's a manual flushing valve, which is a VQA. That's Antelco's code. I think it stands for valve quick action. These are also not mains pressure rated. So I've seen a bunch of people use these to manifold systems and have these and just like valve, T, elbow, T, and they just manually go turn the irrigation systems on and off with this. Do not do that. This is a threaded T and an air release valve. The air release valve is quite a simple product. It's just got a 15mm BSP thread and a rubber O-ring on the bottom. When the water hits that, it pushes it up and seals it off. So not much can go wrong with that unless you've got debris in your system, or if you thread tape this fitting and thread tape gets in there and stops that from working, that's when you'll find you've got leaks, and that's when a client will ring you and say, oh, the system's leaking, and it's actually the air release valve dripping water out and filling up the valve box. So you could choose to not thread tape them. They go in pretty tightly. On the topic of thread tape, I know I've jumped around, but this is all good stuff. You need to thread tape all your mains pressure fittings that are not O-rings. So an O-ring on there and an O-ring on there, manifold fittings, no thread tape required. But screwing a director into a solenoid valve, thread tape is required. Do not ever thread tape a fitting into the base of a sprinkler. They go straight in. You'll find on a lot of them it says use no pipe dope. That's a US term. The negatives of getting thread tape in a sprinkler, especially a gear drive, are outweighed by the potential dripping of an area you're trying to get wet anyway out of there. So don't thread tape sprinklers. In South Australia, we tend not to use articulated risers. We tend to just put sprinklers in like that. I'll cover these off just so that you know about them, because we're recording this and it'll go on YouTube and I'll probably cop a lot of shit from WA. In Western Australia, they love these. Like, they only use Arctic risers. You know, if you go on Facebook pages and comment on irrigation systems in WA-based Facebook groups, I have to have a completely different attitude towards irrigation. It's all sand spears and bores and Arctic risers and Toro. They love Toro. So the idea behind the articulated riser is that the sprinkler goes onto it. That you might have it on PVC. We'll put it onto a fitting for the sake of this. This is what I'll be putting in at my house actually, now that I've driven over them so many times. So that's the pipe and the sprinkler's there. So next time I drive over this sprinkler with a lawnmower, it just does that. But remembering that's got to also get through the soil. The idea behind an articulated riser, especially for councils, so we would always use articulated risers on commercial projects. When that sprinkler is too low, they dig the area up around that articulated riser, pull the sprinkler up slightly, and backfill that with sand. So you're not putting threads on the bottom of that, you're not having to take sprinklers off. So how's that going to work? So that would be like there or there, and then it drops a bit. Let us dig it up and pull it up a bit. The movement of that sprinkler an inch that way is not a big deal. But if it's not popping up high enough, or it's too proud and then the lawnmowers are hitting it, that is a big deal. So, have you guys ever seen these? Have never used them? That's interesting. Yep. Cool. So, yeah, like I said, we don't use them much residentially. I struggle to understand, like, residentially you'd have to do it like this. Almost. Because you're going to dig a trench, what, 450 deep to put a sprinkler in? I don't think so. So, if you are trying to rise a sprinkler up without an articulated riser, we sell male-female threaded adapters that can screw into the bottom of these. So you just screw that off, put the threaded adapter onto the existing threaded fitting, which I don't have, and you can screw heaps of them on there. So, they're like, because they're a male-female, you could put 6 in a row. If you go dig up some of the sprinklers in, I won't say what council, I'm badly pointing at it. You can sometimes find an 8005, which is a rainbow gear drive with like 6 or 8 TBMF male-female adapters, because every season they've just kept bringing them up and up and up and up. So, yeah. That's Arctic's. Filtration we've talked about, valve boxes we've talked about. 330. I want to do a little bit on controllers and a little bit on wiring, and then some troubleshooting stuff. Matt wanted me to leave troubleshooting to the next training session, but I think it would be of value. I want you guys to be able to go home from here going, all right, in real life situations when stuff goes wrong, I've actually learned something that I can try and use to fix it, rather than just the basics of irrigation. So Wi-Fi, so there's controllers, there's Wi-Fi controllers, there's Bluetooth tap timers, and there's controllers with Wi-Fi that communicate with Bluetooth tap timers. We have a lot of people come in here and they really struggle to understand the difference between why their Bluetooth controller can't be programmed from Europe. Right? So Bluetooth technology is 15 meters line of sight. Your phone can talk to your earbuds and this from not far. These guys, Orbit, were first to market, and I think they're going to do a lot of stuff. They haven't done it yet, but I reckon they're pretty close. They've created the ability for their controller to have a Wi-Fi controller and communicate via Bluetooth to these Bluetooth tap timers. So you can put this controller on your wall, run cable out to your solenoid valves, and they'll work, and that's fine, and that can be changed from your phone. But then if it's close enough to these tap timers, they could be on the other side of a concrete path, which you can't get to by digging. They're on a tap running a veggie patch. It can be changed from here, provided it's close enough. They also come with a Wi-Fi adapter hub. That's it there, so that little thing there. So you don't even need this controller to make this timer Wi-Fi compatible. You can't do it with this. This is Bluetooth only. That's Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. I think these are the only ones in the market. I'm sure if I'm wrong, I'll get comments on the YouTube, but that do Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. I can't see these guys being too far away from having a solenoid valve that operates via Bluetooth, and this controller being on a wall and communicating via Wi-Fi back to the person that wants to change the controller, but then changing the signals of these via Bluetooth and eliminating the need for you to run cable in any system that's residential. Obviously, Bluetooth only goes so far, but maybe even having Bluetooth booster points strategically placed around the side of the house to work that. So until then, you need to install cable. So, do we have cable? Man, they didn't prepare this very well. Is this you, Amelia? Can you cut me off some cable, or just get me an off cut of anything? So, you've mounted your irrigation controller on the wall. Wi-Fi or not, the irrigation controller communicates its signal out to the solenoid valves using electricity, 24 volt alternating current. That's why these cables are the same color. It doesn't matter which way you wire these up from one of these controllers. The controller has 240 volts going in, 24 volts going out, so they've got a transformer in them. In here, there's a bit about indoor and outdoor controllers. This document was based on a document that we made in 2009 when indoor controllers were still a thing. Similar to the PC, non-PC, as a pressure compensating, non-pressure compensating product, indoor controllers just don't mean anything anymore. Like the cost difference, thank you, to go from indoor to outdoor is so minimal for the advantage that you get from an outdoor. Like an outdoor controller you can lock so people can't go play with it. Even if it's mounted inside a house, bugs can't get in there and short out across terminals, which is something that might happen over 15 years. So we only stock outdoors. What have we got? Some Hunter XCs here, indoors, but very rare that we would have an indoor. You'll find that you can still buy indoor controllers at hardware shops because the market requires a $49 or an $89 controller, and it doesn't have to be good. So these are all outdoor now. It makes it easier for us to have less codes. I don't even think, like these ones, I don't think they brought out an indoor. I know these didn't bring out an indoor, they didn't bring out an indoor. So you'll start to see that it's just become the norm. So the controllers come generally in a 4, 6, 8, 12 station. That was the original numbers. These guys, the X2, I think they go to a 14 station now. Orbit have got some weird config like 6, 9, 12. Beehive do a 6 and a 12. Rainbird do a 4, 6, 8, 12. But then they also have an expandable range, so to Hunter, so you can get out to about 22 stations in the Rainbird using modules. What's the Pro C's? Hey Mark, you know the Pro C. How does
I use Rainbird.
Do you use the ESPME or these? The ESPME? Yeah, so that's the ESPME we don't have here out the front, but it's the one I've got at my house. It comes as a base 4 and it modules out to 22 with a 6 or a 3 station module. So you can kind of put a 3 station, 3 station, 3 station, and that'll take you out to, this is Matt. Anyone that hasn't met Matt?
Hello, Matt.
One of the great things about Rainbird's controller range and a lot of the stuff that they do is that it's always backwards compatible. There's a lot of manufacturers that make commercial decisions that are best in line with the shareholders of the company and not the customers that buy from the company. Rainbird are still a privately owned business, and when they make a new product, it's a focus of the director, the original owner, to make sure that that product still works with the products they made 30 years ago, within reason. Sometimes they can't, but it's their focus. So if you go to commercial sites, they'll still have controllers that are running on kind of like those green screen computers that can talk to their most current technology because it's always been a focus of theirs. The ESP ME3, which is the one that's out now, I've seen 3 evolutions of that. The modules have never changed, so you can still stick an original module in there. The face plates, it's all still the same thing. They've just kind of made it more and more advanced as time's gone by. So the face plates, for a period, you were able to put a new faceplate in an old controller. I think the technology jumped so much when moving to Wi-Fi that they couldn't keep that backwards compatibility there. But it is a key focus of theirs. Barring the Beehive, most of the controllers you can buy as a dumb controller and then you put a Wi-Fi dongle in it. The Beehive you can only buy as a Wi-Fi. So it means that you can buy a 4-station controller still pretty inexpensively without the Wi-Fi dongle, get it set up, not worry about Wi-Fi, and the house might be in a development where the client buys it and they're like, you know what, I wouldn't mind Wi-Fi. They spend $140, they stick a Wi-Fi dongle in there and they've got it, but the builder's still been able to comply with the price that they need to be profitable. Same with these. These have got a, what do they call it? A wand. I call it a biscuit, which hasn't kind of caught on, but it gets plugged into the side and makes it Wi-Fi compatible. Then you've got other controllers like this, which are not Wi-Fi compatible, never will be. People seem to love this. Some people, the same people that like to watch their sprinklers, like these, not actually watch the MPs, but actually go out and make sure their sprinklers are working, like these controllers, because they can slide the little slides up and down, and they know how long it's going to be working for. So you get your controller, you mount it on the wall, don't plug it in yet, you get your cable. So the cable that we stock for residential controllers is a 1/2 mil squared cable, which is the diameter of the cable, and that's important to know because it's related to the amount of current or amperage that we can get through that cable to the solenoid valves based on a certain distance. So they've got 24 volts coming out of these controllers. They still need to have enough power at these valves to pop them. If the cable wasn't big enough, it wouldn't carry the current. So 1/2 mil is fine to about 120 meters. Commercially, we're putting in 1.5 mil cable with 4 mil common. So every cable has actives and commons. For you guys, it's majority of the time it's only going to be 1/2 mil. And if you're getting us to quote your jobs and it's on a, like obviously if you're doing a job out on a vineyard and you're worried about it because it's 500 meters from the homestead or 350 meters, it goes from 1/2 mil to 1 mil to 1.5 mil to 2.5 mil. And then once you're getting to 2.5 mil, it's probably time to start talking about decoders, which is a whole nother thing which I'm happy to talk to you about, but not today. Wiring up solenoid valves is really quite simple. You have a duster. So you'll have the common and a master valve, and then all your active solenoid valves. Now, I didn't talk about this before with the solenoid valves, but one of the advantages you've got of an automatic system over a manual system is that you can put a master valve on your automatic systems so that protects the rest of the valves. So the master valve would turn on and then the other active valve that's required would turn on. So if one of those active valves has a blowout or the diaphragm breaks or a rock gets stuck in there, that might leak for the period that the master valve's on, but when the master valve shuts off, the whole system's off again, so you're not wasting water unnecessarily. It's just a second point of protection. So you've got your controller. This shit. I think that's run out of ink. These are the best whiteboard markers like in the world. So common, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you might have a master valve as well. And then you'll have, if you've got a master valve, your master valve will be on the manifold, and then they'll go out and there'll be 1, 2, 3. So there's only 3. So the common cable in Australia is black. You can choose what you want. There's no criminal issues with you choosing another colour. But in the interest of, I guess, making it easier for people that come and look at the job after you've been there, if you use black as your common, it's going to be easier for people when they come out and look at the system. The other thing is, cable comes as a 3-core, 5-core, 7-core, 9-core, 13-core. There's always black. So 3-core has black, 5-core has black. They also have white, but I think white's used a bit more in the US. So this cable here is 5-core, which is perfect for this, very well prepared. Green, black, white, blue, and brown. That might be red. I'm going to go with red. So when I used to install, I'd go black for the common, and then I'd go alphabetical order for the other colours, just so I remembered. Do you have a system?
No, I just go black and then whatever.
Yeah, whatever. So the alphabetical order was something that I did because then I could remember like blue, brown, like I knew what order they were going in. It doesn't really matter as long as you know what it is, and you can obviously write in the front of the controller what each one is, and you can label them with label tape. But the black goes to everything. So for the interest of this, we'll use these colours. So off the top of every solenoid valve is 2 wires. And they're usually red, I think red or black, right? Red, all coming off the valves. The master valve is no different to the other valves, unless you choose to have a high pressure master valve. So before I talked about 1600 kPa master valves, you might stick a really strong one there and normal ones there. So from the common, you got a black cable coming out, and then you're going to wire it up to one of each of the valves. So when that controller sends a signal out to anything, it sends electricity through the common, and then it'll make the circuit using any of the other 3 or 4. The master valve will be the same, just there. So every time this controller turns on, electricity will come out both of those and then some of those. So that'll always turn on, and then it will just depend on what the controller wants the others to do. So we talked about whatever colours they were. Let's say they were orange and blue and red. So when solenoid valve number 1 turns on, there's going to be electricity opens the master valve and valve number 1. So then that's operating. Then it'll jump to station 2, so it'll stop that circuit and it will send electricity out through the blue, and then it will complete that circuit and number 2 will open. And then it will go through that whole cycle and do number 3. The way the solenoid valve works is that coil, which is the top bit there, has a pin in there, which is an electromagnetic pin. When the electricity is sent through there, it's an alternating current, so it's actually the pin's vibrating, it's jumping up and down, but it's jumping up and down so fast that it's staying up. It changes the pressure in the valve and it pops the diaphragm. So before I talked about simulating that, by turning that a quarter turn or whatever it works out to be to pop it, you're lifting the pin up manually. If you do it through this system, you're lifting up the pin electronically. Now, that will only work as long as electricity is being run through to here. So if someone cuts that cable or the power gets turned off, that valve will close. If you have a battery operated version of the same thing, it works differently. So you've probably heard of a Hunter node. I'd say that would be something that everyone's heard about. Yep, no. Say no if you haven't, I need to know. So a Hunter node's a battery operated solenoid valve. The controller runs on 9-volt batteries. Hunter node is kind of the esky of the battery operated world, like everyone calls it a node, but Rainbird make them, Toro make them, Hunter just came out first and best. The way it works is the coils are different. Do you want to grab them here? Yeah, so as you can see here, these have got 2 red cables, alternating current, doesn't matter, electricity's going back and forth, back and forth. With a direct current, which is a battery, it can only go through one path. So the Hunter node has a black cable and a red cable. The controller has 2 9-volt batteries in it. The controller sends a signal through those 2 and it opens the valve and locks it open. So it's a latching coil, it holds it up with a magnet. That's lifting that pin like I described here, but it just holds it up. So until that controller sends a signal back to that to close it down, it will stay open. So if someone cut the cables on a node while it was working, it would stay on forever. You'd have to then get either a 9-volt battery and tap it on the coils on the right polarity and it will close it, or get the controller reprogrammed, like as in rehooked up. So these are 2 examples of the battery operated products. That's the Hunter node. So you see there, that's the controller. Very basic, but really, really good. Waterproof to like 3 meters or something. The batteries in here will last a couple of years, depending on how often it's opening and closing. The reason why this has to latch is because a 9-volt battery can't sustain that amount of time that it needs to open, because the power will run out. Obviously with electricity, it's just a continuous supply. The idea is that you put 2 batteries in here. These will work with one, so you just sit them in the back, in there, close that up. 1 battery obviously lasts half as long as 2. This is the new one. It's not that new now, it's probably 2 or 3 years old. The original node only had 1 battery. For councils, the majority of these go into council areas. They'll go out and change the batteries every couple of years. Obviously by having 2 batteries go in there instead of 1, it's reduced the amount of time that they need to spend out in the field changing batteries. Really easy to program once you understand it. It's pretty much, I always say VCR, but that doesn't make sense to a lot of people anymore. But once you learn how to program these, you'll remember it forever. There's not that much of a combination there. They have just brought out a Bluetooth version of this. So the Bluetooth version makes it even easier for you to go stand at the valve box, communicate with the Hunter node. I think it tells you how the batteries are going, so it saves you trying to unbolt the lid and dig out the valve box. With these, you have to make sure the polarity is correct. So red and black is red and black. You can get the battery operated products with up to 8? 6. So you can get a controller that will run 6 nodes. So it's got a black, and then red. So you just have to make sure that the black goes to the black and then all the reds go to the red. The yellow cable you see on here is for a rain sensor. You can hook up rain sensors to these. I haven't talked about rain sensors with you guys because I personally am not a massive believer in them. It's, I guess, something worth knowing that rain sensors exist. My concern with rain sensors is that they have a small bunch of leather discs inside a hole smaller than your little finger, and they mount on a gutter on your house, and hopefully some rain falls in the hole, expands those discs and stops your irrigation cycle for a whole property based on that much leather. So do you put them in? No. I think rain sensors are done, and that's probably a really rough thing to say for people that make rain sensors, but with weather data now, like these controllers, especially if you go into the Hunter range and get a HydroWise controller and pay the subscription that they have available to their weather data and that their weather stations, there's weather stations at the airport that are worth whatever 30 or 40k that measure rainfall and wind, or they aggregate, I don't know which one it is, one of them aggregates all the weather data that's available on the internet and helps reprogram the controller. So to rely on a piece of plastic on a gutter is, I've never been a fan. Now there's actually a substitute for it, which is technology, which is way better. So that's basic wiring of a controller.
Always put a master controller on.
Rare. Master valves are like, I don't even know if these two would have even heard of it. No. So we don't teach them about it. It's like every state in Australia, and then obviously every place in the world, have their own little irrigation idiosyncrasies. Adelaide was a Hunter town for so long, for like probably 15 years ago to 5 or 7 years ago, it was Hunter. Like Rainbow didn't even have a market here because they hadn't spent the time here. Master valves, who knows, and I guess if anyone's watching on YouTube, let me know, but there'd be states in America where you'd be laughed at if you didn't put a master valve in. And then there's probably places in Australia that it's not done because these valves, in my opinion, it's probably half the fault of me because like we do so much education without them. But these are such a good product that they rarely go anyway. So why stick another one in front? So yeah, I think that's about it. People generally don't put their cable in conduit. So this is the cable. You might run a conduit down the wall, but generally once it's in the ground, it's not in conduit. I don't know if anyone here is. The wire joins can be made with these are 314. They're just a crush joiner that you use to put the cables in and crush them. If you're going to use these joiners, you want to make sure you sheath your cable. So these wire joiners are designed to not have cable sheath, so it's designed that the cable to slide straight in, and when you crush the joiner, the metal that's inside these joiners splits around the cable. You won't be able to probably see it from there, but there's these metal teeth. The wire finds its way into that and it slides past the wire and it makes enough of a connection. Because these are a big joiner and the solenoid valve cable has a thicker wall than the active cables, what you'll find is that takes the join but that doesn't. So I've had a few sites recently where I've gone out and they were having trouble that the solenoid valves weren't opening. You're a bit sleepy, mate. How can you be tired? What do you do? Fucking hell. So what I would do with these is sheath them back a little bit, not so much that they would pop out past that point, and then twist them together, stick them in and close them. You really want to make sure that the gel that's in here completely covers the metal that's coming out of the wire, because these will be sitting in a solenoid valve box, which is quite a wet area. Or you can step it up and I don't know anyone that does this, you can solder the joins and then put a heat shrink cap over them, if that was something that you were interested in doing. Just don't twist the wires together and wrap them with electrical tape. That's not an acceptable method of wire joining. See much of that? Just for context, I probably should have said at the start, Mark's based out, Barossa Valley. So there'd probably be a lot of genuine bush mechanic irrigation systems. We've got 10 or 11 minutes. I'm happy to keep going after 4, but if anyone has to leave at 4, all good, I get it. Especially if you've done a full day of work and then you've got to come listen to me talk for 2 hours. So I'll go through some troubleshooting. Has anyone got any questions about Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, all that jazz? No. So in the book, I've got a bit in there about troubleshooting. So the majority of the questions that we have here are around solenoid valves not opening or not closing. So I've just talked to you about the way solenoid valves work. So they need electricity delivered to a solenoid coil to pop the coil for the valve to open. There's a rubber diaphragm inside the solenoid valve. Where's he put my tools? That pops up and drops down when the pressure changes. So if a valve won't close, it means, so like we've just talked about, that for it to stay open, it has to have wire being continuously delivered to the solenoid valve. So if it's not closing, it's generally not an electrical problem, because if there was an electrical problem, it would just automatically close. So you'll find if a solenoid valve is stuck, if it's stuck open, it's because of something to do with the diaphragm, which means that there's either a piece of debris underneath the diaphragm holding it open from closing and the water keeps flowing, or there's something stuck in here. So that's quite a fine area there, very small holes. If any dirt gets in there, it can impact the way the solenoid valve works. What I would then do is take the solenoid valve apart by taking these screws out. Now Hunter's got only a 4-screw valve, which is why I chose this one for the display. But what do they have? 6, and I think Rickdale have 8. So this is in the ground. It won't turn off. You're not sure why. You've undone your screws. You lift this diaphragm, the top of this valve off and lift it up. Now inside the solenoid valve is a spring, which is really important, and a diaphragm. So when you take the diaphragm off, the spring will usually disappear into the same place that pens and socks go, and you'll be lost. So be really careful not to damage the diaphragm and to keep the spring. Actually, that's good. That one didn't go too far. So by this point, you will have found something, usually. So there's either a rock in the base here, in there, and at that, you've obviously turned your ball valve off back here as well, so that there's not water flying out here. Then you might go turn the ball valve back on and try and flush some water through. You check the diaphragm, make sure there's no splits in it. Check the top of that, make sure that there's no dirt or any cracks or anything there. Okay, that's not there's nothing there, or there is something there, you've taken that out. The diaphragm might be broken, you go buy a new diaphragm, fit it all back together and screw it back together. It's pretty simple. The danger is it's really easy to make a mistake here. So you could, if you put the spring above the bonnet or below the bonnet instead of above the diaphragm, or if the diaphragm, like you're trying to get the diaphragm to be reseated back in its like original space perfectly. If you don't do that properly, you could cause, like, it's still going to be a problem. The good thing about the solenoid valves that we stock and have stocked for a long time is that the bases are generally the same. So Hunter, like that base, there used to be a product called an SRV and a HPV, and this is a PGV. That bit generally remained the same. So if you had a problem, like you'll get called out to a site and it's 20-year-old irrigation system, the diaphragm might be damaged. You might have this like tree roots literally grown over the manifold, and there's nothing you can do. If you can go find the same top, you would be able to take the top off and put a new diaphragm and a new top back on, and you'll be fine. So the Rickdale valves, which I talked about before, which are the grey ones that you'll see everywhere, they haven't changed for 30 or 40 years. This design's probably the same age. So you could be able to troubleshoot that and fix it without having to take this bit out. You don't want to start cutting manifolds out and pulling them apart. Now,
Do you sell the diaphragms?
we do, but you're probably better off buying a valve, depending on how much you're doing. So the way that we sell a diaphragm is exactly what I've just done. And I take that out of the valve and I'll sell you that. And then I go put that on the shelf and then I'll sell you that. Now, we sell a valve for 24 maybe. You might pay 16 or 18 for a diaphragm. So it just depends how much of it you're going to do. And if you're charging your client to do it, you might as well keep the coil and who knows, or replace both. But we do sell them. There should be an area with them in a plastic bag, I'm thinking. Yep. The funny thing is we throw that out, and then every now and then someone comes in and they want to buy that. So nothing, this is really mostly what goes wrong, and then obviously these are a secondary issue, but nothing else moves in there. So if a valve won't open, it's usually electronic. So if a valve's not opening, it's usually the electricity is not getting through to the cables to lift the coil to pop the valve, or there's a blockage in the valve but in a different way. So you'd go through a different process. You'd go out and so if it's not opening from the controller, you'd go out and turn the coil, and if it opens then you know there's nothing physically wrong with the valve. There might be an electrical issue with the coil, but there's no issue with the coil opening it. I would then change another coil from in the same box and switch them over and see if that operates the valve. You would generally then start to kind of work down that path and go, okay, well, the valve's fine, the diaphragm's fine, the coil's not it is working because I've changed the cables on it and it's working with another cable here. You might find that that's cut and that's not, so you start working back up that line to work out why it's not working. But it's real basic stuff, and once you understand the physics or the science of it all, you can almost work through this checklist and go, all right, well that's working, that's working, that's working, that's working. You might get back to the controller and someone's turned a rain sensor bypass over, so the controller's just not sending the signal. So you think it is, so there's nothing physically wrong with any part of the infrastructure. It's a programming issue back here. Once you get to there and there's no problems, then you haven't been able to work it out, kind of thing. So that's that. Leaking PVC, leaking blue line, leaking polypipe. They're probably one of the calls you're going to get a lot of. I've got some fittings up here that I would encourage you to come and have a shot with. If you haven't used a Cobra clamp before, I've got them here. I'll damage some pipe and you can come and fix it. A lot of you, this is probably more basic than you need to be doing. So if you want to come and fix that, you can. With PVC and blue line, they're obviously mains pressure pipes. There's a whole different process. There's telescopic repair couplings for PVC. If you're using them, make sure they're fully extended. Make sure you're using high pressure glue. So the blue glue for stormwater pipe is not to be used for high pressure. You need to use the green glue. If you use the normal green glue, you need to let it set for 24 hours. If you use the high pressure glue that's quick set, you only have to wait kind of 15 or 20 minutes. Blue line, I think there's telescopic repair couplings for blue line. We don't have any. If you ever needed them, we could probably get you them. Filmac do a 3G straight through joiner now. Have you seen them? So you know how like you're trying to repair something and you like stick one side on, then you're trying to shove it back down? You can buy blue line fittings now where the internal bore's bigger and you can slide the blue line joiner down the pipe and bring it back, but you have to order them. They might be 20% more expensive, but I'm not sure if we're stocking them. I think we probably should, but that's mostly, and then obviously if you've got a dripper that's leaking, then everything's great. If you've got a dripper that's blocked or not working, you can generally cut that dripper out and put a joiner on each side. If you've got a sprinkler that's losing its arc, it's generally a warranty. What else is there? Anyone else got any troubleshooting that you want me to troubleshoot for you while we're here? Everyone's like, no, it's 4 o'clock, I want to go home.